Hey guys, today I have a really instructive game that I think you guys will find super interesting. It was Portisch with the white pieces against Petrosian in 1972. This game also featured, in the style of Petrosian, a very nice exchange sacrifice, so let's jump straight into it. Now, Petrosian played with c4 a lot with the white pieces, and therefore, naturally, with the black pieces, he knew how to respond well as well, and he played this very safe system, fianchettoing his bishop on g7 and developing very normally. Now here after d5, he has a pretty big decision to make, what to do with this knight. He moved the knight back to b8, and his idea is of course to maneuver the knight to c5, either through d7 or a6, and get it to this very nice square. The issue with this move, or the downside, because this is a fine move, but the downside of this move is that it's very slow and you're losing a lot of time. And so another alternative for black would be to go knight to e5 here. And the idea is if white takes, it's true that your pawn structure is a little ruined, but on the other hand, you can castle very quickly, develop your bishop very quickly, your rooks have some pretty clear targets here, and on the queen side, you generally speaking have a lot of play. And so this was one option for Petrosian, but he instead decided to go to b8, and of course his idea, like I mentioned, is to play knight to a6 and eventually head towards c5. Now, in this next bit of play, we see what Petrosian was known really well for, which is to take some of the pieces that are not on their ideal squares and find the perfect squares for them. And so we see this move b6, looking to then play bishop to b7, putting the bishop on a useful square and a useful diagonal. And then this knight here, which a lot of people I think would maybe immediately play knight to c5, thinking that they already developed the knight, but Petrosian understood that this knight has a very nice square here on e5, and so he spent the time to go via d7 to e5, and indeed this knight here is now super powerful. And again, with the queen, a very small, subtle move, but it does a lot. It activates the queen and just makes the queen that much better. And so rook to c1 to defend the pawn, and now finally knight to c5. b4, kicking the knight away, but the knight also has this nice square on e4. The queen moves, and now a6, followed by a5, really questioning this pawn, trying to carve out this square back for the knight. And after b5, we get this very interesting position where black does get back the square on c5, but of course white gets this really powerful square on c6. And this is exactly what both players eventually play for. So knight to c6, rook to e8, which is a very interesting move, and it's actually very instructive because the move that white played here, b5, a couple moves ago, really locked up the queen side. And so this rook on a8 is probably not going to get that much play on the queen side. And Petrosian realized that on the king side, on e8, these e and f pawns, where the rooks are supporting them, are probably going to be the ones that now are going to roll down the board, because they have the ability to. And so he placed his rooks in a way that seems very awkward, and it seems like they're crowding, but at the same time, they're in their great squares to support these pawns. And so after this move, white moved their knight, and after knight to d7, eventually we do get this knight on c5. And now comes the move bishop g5. And now we reach a very critical moment, perhaps the critical moment of the game. And so white, of course, is aiming to attack this e7 square. And so I think a lot of people here would try to find resources to defend the pawn, right? Something like knight to f6, for example, adding some defense, blocking this bishop, it makes total sense. But after rook to e1, regardless of whether white will be able to win this pawn, which in some cases they will, in some cases they won't, but regardless, white has the initiative. And that should be pretty clear. I mean, black just seems really cramped here. White has this really powerful knight, and comparing these knights, the knight that white has is much more in black's position, and so black is just very cramped here, and they don't have a lot of moves to play. And so for that reason, something like this, although maybe would save the pawn, probably will not be something that black will like, and this position is probably very bad for black. And for that reason, Petrosian ended up doing something very similar to the game that he did in Reshevsky Petrosian, which I went over a couple of days ago, which I'll link in the description if you're interested. And he really gave away some material, gave away an exchange to be exact, and by doing so, he switched the nature of the position. So here he played the move e5. The idea being he's grabbing back space, right? And again, with these rooks here, his idea was to push e and f pawns. But of course, this allows the move bishop e7, and suddenly, isn't these rooks? Isn't black going to lose one of the rooks? Well, black will lose one of the rooks, but then he plays f5, and even if we already stop it here, black is indeed down material, but we can look at this and say, well, suddenly black has a lot of play on the king side. And if they maneuver some of their pieces to the king side, then black will be able to maybe form some attacking chances. And so by giving away some material, we've really switched the initiative. The attack on the queen side, although the pieces here look very nice, they don't have as much potential to move down the board as do these pawns, which black now has on e5 and f5. And so the game continued with bishop to e2, bishop h6, rook to c2, bishop to c8, simply improving these two bishops in the last moves, getting them onto more useful diagonals. And after knight to c3, knight to d7, and knight to f6, also improving this knight. And finally, black starts pushing these pawns with f4. I think a lot of people would think e4 maybe makes more sense to keep this bishop open, but now this bishop is a little locked, and white actually has this annoying move f3. And it might seem like after e3 this pawn is really dangerous and it can be supported, but white can at all times just move the knight to e2 and blockade this pawn, and black basically stopped any potential attacks. They just got this very powerful pawn, and instead of that, black wanted to keep attacking possibilities on the table and played f4, maybe now trying to activate this bishop and later push these pawns even further. And after rook to e2, white continues with knight to a4. And here, after the trade of knights, knight to d7 was played, which is a very important move to play here, because if you don't occupy this square here on c5 again with one of your knights, then, or with your only knight, then white will have the ability to play c5, even sacrificing some material, but breaking through on the queen side. And again, it's very important to highlight how these pawns look very nice, but right now they're stuck. And that will stay that way if the knight manages to come to c5. So, for example, king to h8, which I think a lot of people would suggest, because then there's opportunities to avoid this check, which happened in the game, you'll see in a couple of seconds. Well, then c5 comes, and this becomes a little unpleasant. This pawn, if you take like this, becomes a little weak. So the point is white gets some very nice counterplay here. And so for that reason, knight to d7 was played immediately, but like I said, this allows this check, and then trading on c8. And it might seem very strange for white to strategically trade these pieces, because the knight here on c6 looked very good, but looks can be very deceiving. And in this case, the knight looked good, but really the queen side is, like I've said a couple of times, very stuck, and really all the play has transferred to the king side, and this bishop is influencing the king side greatly. And so in order to maybe also let these pawns start to roll down the board, because maybe the knight was blocking some of these pawns in some lines, but also greatly to just get rid of the two bishops that black has, and specifically the bishop that is influencing currently the most, white decided to trade. And so queen takes, and now the knight jumps to c5, and in the end, after this move h3, it was agreed a draw here, because white is up material, but first of all, white has, if black does nothing here, white has no clear plan. There's no real way for white to really gain or do anything with their material. And secondly, at the right moment, black can try to attack. And so in white's perspective, they have some material, but if anything, black has all the chances for attacking later in the game. And you might be wondering, why not just go e4 immediately? Well, here it doesn't really work as well, because simply rook takes, giving back some of the material, but the end position is really good here. I mean, the rook is now active. white has gained some more space. The e-file is under white's control, so some of the properties of the position actually give white a pretty nice advantage here. And so the best result, the true result after h3 was indeed a draw, and you can kind of take this as a sign that going all the way back, the exchange sacrifice that black truly did work, because it changed the nature of the position, where in this position white has all of the attacking chances along the open e-file and the very powerful queenside, but after this black got such a nice attacking position that it forced white into a draw. And so a very nice strategic and positional game by Petrosian, and I think very instructive as well. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I will see you next time. Peace out.